Hey, everybody. My name is Jared. I'm one of the team members with Podcast Movement, and I'm delighted today to talk with my friend Chris Vasquez. He's with AWeber. He's coming to you from right outside of Philadelphia today, and we're talking turning fans into friends. Chris, for those that have not been familiar with your work or know much about you or AWeber, can you just give a little background about yourself and AWeber, and then we can just hop right in?
Of course. So I'm the Chief Product Officer at AWeber. AWeber is a marketing platform and communication platform for small businesses and creators. And we provide tools for emailing, creating landing pages, and basically capturing an audience, building an audience, and then engaging them and turning it into a relationship. The past couple of years have been really fun at AWeber. We've released a bunch of new things, a lot of which are geared for podcasters. Things like the ability to embed playable podcasts in your emails and easily embed them on landing pages if you want to make an episode-specific page or something like that. But in general, like, our mission is to create remarkable experiences between creators and their listeners and their customers. So it's just incredibly, incredibly rewarding. But I'm super excited to be here today talking about turning fans into friends. The theme of this is all community. Like, how do you take a base of your listeners as a podcaster, or prospects, if you're thinking about this from a business funnel point of view, and turn them into an active community that not only listens to you or buys from you, but also helps you grow your fan base or your customer base. I know it's super challenging, or it can feel super challenging. I know I've felt that way with the number of projects that I've run. But I'm going to walk through some examples of AWeber customers today who are doing really interesting things and are growing their community as a result. So I'm going to pull up my screen. Let's see, how's that? I'll go full screen. Every time before I start one of these, I'm like, okay, I'm going to prepare all of this in advance. And then I never, ever do. So forgive me. How's that? There we go. That looks great. All right. So let's talk about turning fans into friends. So I'll give a somewhat less brief introduction of myself. I'm Chris. I'm the Chief Product Officer at AWeber. And we started out as an email company, and I love email. I've done a number of projects that are related to email. There's wouldyourrather.fun, which is a would you rather scenario you get every week. That's probably where I have my most active community and where I've learned most of the lessons about what it takes to build a group of people who are active advocates for you. But I've done some other things too that, if you want to check it out, I'll share a link at the end of this presentation to this slide deck, and it's got all sorts of good links and resources in it. And if you can't stay for the whole thing and you want a link to this deck, or you have questions, just reach out to me on Twitter, or you can email me at the email on this slide too. And as we're going, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I would be more than happy to answer them. Let's get going. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about what the heck are superfans, how do you find superfans in your audience, and what to do once you know who your superfans are. And we're going to be looking at three projects or three creative creators as an example. Mark Asquith's Podcast Accelerator. I think he's doing a presentation later on this month as well. He's a fascinating guy. Has tons of lessons to teach and examples to follow when it comes to building a community that feels like a community of people who care. Josh Spector's newsletter called For the Interested. He has a number of different newsletters, projects, things that he's done that, although it's not a podcast, have some direct parallels to building an engaged audience for your podcast. And then my project, Would You Rather, because I have made a ton of mistakes in that project and have learned some lessons as a result. So let's start with, what the heck are superfans? George Plimpton, He was a journalist, an author. He did some really wacky things, like playing as an amateur athlete against professional athletes, so he could write about the experience. He defines superfans as people absolutely enveloped by their passion. Superfans are the people who are so invested in your content or your project or your product that they'll change their life in some way, whether it's large or small, to consume your content or be a part of it. So when you're thinking about superfans, think about Beliebers or Little Monsters, Lady Gaga fans, or Katy Cats, who are Katy Perry fans. Those are an example of superfans when you're trying to hold it in your head. They're the people who really want to be a part of your content. They don't want to just be a passive recipient of it. They want to be an active participant in your project. And why do they matter? I found this quote from Vince Lombardi, and for any Office fans, this is my one meme I have in here. Individual commitment to a group effort, that's what makes a team work. It's what makes a company work, a society work, and a civilization work. You can't build community by yourself. Just by definition, you can't build a community by yourself. So it's not just nice to have superfans in your community, they're necessary for actually building it. Because otherwise you're just pushing messages out. And sometimes it can feel like you're pushing them into the void. Jared and I were just chatting before we jumped on the stream about how, especially when you're starting a new project and you're doing it all by yourself, it can feel super lonely and like you're not making any progress. So in addition to the fact that superfans will actually help you connect to other people, and they'll bear the load with you or share the load with you, it also just helps to not feel so lonely and not feel so disconnected and like everything is on your shoulders. So we're talking about superfans as the focus of this talk because, in my opinion, if you can find them and you can get them on board with your project, that's the single best way that you can build community. So how do you find those superfans? That might seem impossible. Like, well, if I'm just getting started, how am I going to have superfans? Like, this doesn't seem attainable at all. But au contraire, there are two things that you can do here to identify superfans and start fostering a good relationship from the very first interaction with them. So first, I want to call out something that Mark Asquith does with his podcast Accelerator. And he does this really well. He will engage in conversations, whether they're on Twitter or Facebook communities or wherever he's at. And he's always looking for the opportunity to make other people feel special, like he cares about them individually, which he really does. I don't want it to sound like it's disingenuous. He truly cares about people, but he wants to make sure that he can show it to people and also communicate that they'll get something by interacting with him, that he's going to make their lives better. I pulled out one recent tweet just from the other day where someone was asking him a question about his product, which is it's a podcast hosting product called Captivate. And Mark's response, he could have answered in DMs, he could have answered in the tweet thread there as well, but instead he's inviting Richard in to be part of the podcast experience, of the podcast accelerator experience. So he extends an invitation for Richard to come and ask the question when Mark is doing his podcast podcast coaching, which is awesome because it gives Richard the personal invitation, and it also is going to share the learning and the value that Mark is delivering to Richard in a more public forum. It's also going to showcase Richard and kind of elevate him a little bit more and just publicize him a bit, which is something that people generally feel pretty good about. Josh Spector with For the Interested, he does a really good job of this too. What you're looking at right now on the screen is the email that you get when you join Josh's list, where he does the normal things in a welcome email, which if you don't have an email list and if you don't have an automated welcome email, you are missing the single best opportunity to engage with people. And it doesn't have to take a ton of time. It doesn't have to be a complex automation. This is one very well thought out email that Josh sends when you join his list. And in it, the thing that's really important here is he extends an invitation as well. He tells you if you reply to the email and tell a bit about your work, he's going to respond in two ways. He's going to respond with a specific suggestion for you. That's value. It's going to make your life better as a potential superfan. And he's going to spread the word about your product, which again, just makes you feel special and like you're getting value from interacting with Josh. And it opens the door to start forming relationships with people and identifying these superfans, seeing the people who really eventually resonate with your work. And I know Josh gets a really high response rate to this welcome email, but this is an elegant way to do it. So extend the invitation, tell someone what they're going to get in return for responding to the invitation. Josh also does something really neat with his actual community that he's building. So he has a Facebook group that he has for newsletter creators. That's the community that he tries to serve. And any of you who have tried to run a Facebook group in the past, you might have experience with it either being the Wild West, where people are just all over the place and it can become toxic and all these things, or you might experience the other end of the spectrum where it's just crickets. What Josh and his team do really well, and for the interested, is they've created rituals for connection. So every Monday, you know that there's going to be an opportunity for you to share your newsletter so you can publicize yourself. Every Wednesday, there's an opportunity to share a product or service that you create for newsletter creators. And then other days, there are other things like opportunities to find somebody to cross-promote with, or opportunities to share something that you've written for other people to include in their newsletters. But the point here is he has very clear expectations of what's going to happen when, and there are constant opportunities for people to opt in as superfans. In the AWeber Facebook community, this is one of the ways that we identify our superfans, the people who answer other people's questions or respond to many of the prompts that we send. That's a really clear indication that someone is primed to engage with you and take and help share the burden of promoting whatever your product is. Okay, so what to do once you know who your super fans are. So let's say you've identified some folks either through interacting on social media with people and giving them invitations to join your show or participate in some way, or through identifying them through a question that you ask in your welcome message, which again, I'm just going to prod you to do that. It's very little work for a very high return. But what do you do with it then? Where's the real value in these super fans? The first thing I want to say to that is just like the base level thing that you have to do to get value out of your interactions with your super fans is you need to consistently show up for them. Before you can ask them to do anything, you need to establish trust with them, because communities of all sorts rely on that shared trust and a shared set of expectations. So if you tell your community that you're going to do something, do it. Because the most surefire way that you can tear a community apart is to make promises that you don't keep. So both Mark and Josh, they maintain a consistent content schedule. They post regularly. They tell you when they're going to post, and then they find a way to do it. And if for some reason they can't, they over-communicate about the fact that they can't and why. They also respond to people when they reach out to them. And they do it in a timely fashion, even if it's to say that they don't have the answer to a question someone is asking. This is a really important thing, and an area where, if you notice the logos on the screen, it's Mark's and Josh's. Mine is not up there because with Would You Rather, I don't maintain a consistent enough schedule. And this is an area where when I send consistently for months in a row, I will gradually start building my subscriber numbers, and when we were podcasting, my listener numbers as well. But then when I stopped, without giving any sort of rationale for why I stopped or telling my audience that I was going to be stopping for a certain period of time, growth really came to a pretty screeching halt. And I've done this a number of times for a number of different reasons, where I've posted consistently for 4 to 6 months, seen really great growth in the community, both in terms of numbers and in terms of interaction with each other. And then I'd stop for some reason. Either I got too busy or there was some other reason why. And even if I just stopped for a month or two, it would completely kill that community interaction. Because they had come to rely on me, and in breaking my promise to them, it just shook up the whole foundation of our trust relationship, which was a real bummer. And I need to stop doing that. But I'm sharing my mistakes so you can not make it. And then the last thing is, in all of your interactions with your super fans, you want to focus on how you can help them. Because although ultimately they're going to provide a lot of benefit to you, the reason that they're oftentimes doing it is because of how you're paying back into their lives. And the more you talk about how you're going to help them, the more willing they'll be to share the load and share your content and even contribute. The next thing that you want to do to empower your super fans to make an impact on your community and make it a strong and growing and exciting community is to create ownership opportunities. Because the more that you can help your super fans, your fans, the people who listen to you, feel like they're a part owner of your content or your business or your project, the more likely they're going to be to participate regularly and advocate for you. So one of the things that I do in my Would You Rather onboarding email sequence is I ask people, well, I should describe a little more what the Would You Rather emails are. Every week, you get an email that has an illustrated Would You Rather scenario up top, and it gives people the opportunity to select which of the two or more things they would rather be. So would you rather fight the Minotaur or Medusa? And you get to pick which one and then tell why. I know it sounds stupid, but people seem to like it, and I like doing it. So tough luck. But one of the ways that I try and identify my superfans and give them something to do, help them feel a sense of ownership, is in my onboarding campaign. I ask them if they have fun Would You Rather scenario ideas. And I say that if they do, I may end up illustrating them, and when I do, I credit them. And every person who I have done an illustrated scenario for, that's hyperbolic. Like I don't know the exact number, but at least 90% of the people that I've done a custom illustrated Would You Rather scenario for, they're still active readers, and they still comment regularly and participate regularly because they feel like they're a part of this thing. You know, they've made an impact, they've shaped it. The next thing that you can do to make sure that you have a really effective community that sort of self-replicates and self-manages itself is by connecting your superfans together. And I found that the most effective way to do this is through sharing user-generated content. In my case, here's an example of a Would You Rather email. When somebody clicks an answer, the next thing that they do is they can fill out a reason why. And I share some of the best and funniest reasons why in the email and link to the Twitter or website or Instagram of the person who shared that piece of feedback. So they get some benefit in the fact that they're going to potentially get exposure when they write funny quality content. This has been a really popular aspect of my newsletter, something that people frequently comment on. When they get a comment featured for the first time, I'll oftentimes get emails back saying like, oh, wow, I'm glad you liked my comment. Thank you so much for sharing. And people will also note to me that when we send Would You Rather emails that include a content or an answer from them, they'll frequently get new followers on Twitter or Instagram, which is a win for them. Now, a couple caveats when it comes to UGC. user-generated content, you want to make sure that you have consent from the community manager or the community person before you share. Whether you're asking explicitly, like one-to-one, when you see something really neat that they've done in your community and reach out to them through a DM or an email or something, or whether it's part of a standard submission process where you ask for consent. This is both so you don't get yourself in legal trouble, and also just because it's not cool to share somebody else's stuff without their consent. The next is to ask people where they'd like to be attributed. So if you share somebody's content, the thing that they get from that sharing is exposure. And so you just want to ask them where you want to drive any traffic that might be more or interested to learn more about them. And then the last is include a call to action for others to share too. So it's important for the continued success of Would You Rather that people continue to answer the question and share their responses. So it's important for me to highlight the fact that, hey, when you answer, you might be featured in this in the email as well. Next up, an important thing to make sure that your superfans stay engaged with the community is to make sure that they don't have dead ends. And that is like folks who are excited about your content and want to engage with it in some way. You want to make sure that they always have opportunities to engage. Whether it's an ongoing comment thread in a Facebook or Slack, or it's just something that they can do in response to one of your episodes. If you don't give people opportunities to follow up, they're not generally going to create opportunities on their own. So if you want someone to be consistently engaging with you, you have to have things for them to engage with. You don't want to make them feel forced, like they have to jump through hoops to get access to your content or something. Instead, you want to give them the privilege because you appreciate them. And I think the best way to illustrate this is to share an example of how we do this at AWeber in this case. This is something you can replicate in whatever email provider you're using, most likely. But it's easy to do in AWeber, and it's really working for us. So we send a lot of email. We're an email company, so that shouldn't be a surprise for you. But one of the things that we send is a blog digest. It has all sorts of neat stuff that's going on in the blog and across our site. And in every email we send, we include this thing at the bottom, the happy face and the sad face. We call it our sentiment widget. And what we're using that for is to help us identify both people who are not into our content so we can reach out to them and figure out how we can make it better or how we can make their experience better. But we're also using it to identify superfans and give them something to do. So when somebody clicks on the happy face, we're making the assumption that they have pretty good vibes for us at that time. And are we always right? No, sometimes people are just clicking around or accidentally click. But the risk of offending someone who wasn't actually into your content is pretty low compared to the upside of speaking to someone who is. So when someone clicks on that happy face, they get entered into an automated campaign where we wait a little while and then we send them a message. And in our case, what we're doing is we've recognized you have positive vibes. You were activated enough by those vibes to click the happy face. So we feel like we have the opportunity to ask them to do a relatively small thing. So we send them this email that thanks them. We're using this dynamic image that inputs their first name into the image. It's pretty fun and interesting, but not required by any means. And then we have our ask, where we are asking them to join our advocate program. And again, our opportunity here is really to talk to them about how it's going to make their lives better as opposed to what's in it for us. And the what's in it for them is when they sign up as advocates, they can earn money through referring people to AWeber. But this is a great sort of thing for you to potentially adopt on your own. If you're already sending emails, or if you have a website where you can embed a survey or something that could kick off an automation, this is a great way to automatically remove a dead end for your superfans. We have tested a bunch of stuff in this email, everything from leaving a review for us because we're a technology platform, to just sharing us about us on Twitter or in their Facebook group on social media. And we see people actively engaging with this all the time. So as you see, our engagement rates around this campaign are pretty nice. We have almost a 75% open rate and a 20% click rate, which is pretty good. And we could probably improve that if we spent more time experimenting around this. But this isn't really about this specific email. It's about the fact that we're trying to identify folks who are already feeling good about us and giving them something else to do. Now, like Josh Spector, to go back to an earlier example, he has those days of the week rituals that he has, which give his community something to do, where they can share their newsletter or share technology or even just ask questions. The important thing is people know that they can come back every day and they'll have something to engage with. So I want to recap what we just talked through. And I also had just kind of a parting thought to leave you with. The recap here, though, is to find your fans, you want to actively be inviting people in to connect with you. And you want to be creating rituals for connection. So people know that you care about them and you're giving them explicit direction to join your group. And then they have opportunities to make themselves known that they care about you. Josh Spector's example is a great one. And then to turn them into a community of superfans who are connected with each other and interacting, you need to show up. You need to create ownership opportunities. And here, I'd encourage you to think about a lot of the signs of an effective, active, alive community. Specifically when it comes to podcasts. I was talking again to Jared before we jumped on here about what some of my favorite podcasts are. And I'm a big fan of like real play tabletop game podcasts, like Dungeons and Dragons podcasts. And you notice that around communities like that, you see things like these, which are oftentimes not moderated by the show themselves, but are moderated by super passionate fans, something that they can feel a sense of ownership for. And you see a lot of fan art around shows like that as well, which is, again, a sign of ownership. Now, if you're running a podcast that is for HVAC professionals, teaching them skills about HVAC, are you going to have fan art? Not likely. But what could you give people the opportunity to create, and what could you encourage them to create? I don't have an answer to that, but I think that is a good creative question for you to ask yourself as a podcast producer. Next up, you want to connect your superfans together because although you're going to be trying to do all these things, making sure that there are ownership opportunities, showing up, leaving no dead ends, if you can get your superfans interacting with each other, that's when they start doing those things. They'll start conversations on their own. They'll start wikis. They'll start funny memes or interesting threads around fan art or producing some sort of something. And then finally, leave no dead ends. You want to try and always have something for your audience to be able to participate in. Not just stuff to read from you, but opportunities to feedback as well. So the last thing, and this is how I end everything that I talk about, is as a creator myself, I know how incredibly difficult it can be at times to keep going when it doesn't feel like you're getting the feedback that tells you that you're doing well. And just like creating content or like editing your podcast or anything like that, building a community can also feel really tough when you're in the early stages. But I want to encourage you to try this and stick with it because it's likely hard now because you're trying to do a lot of this stuff alone. And if you can find even one passionate fan who will send you a tweet, a DM, or an email or something, just letting you know that something made an impact on their life, that type of thing, in addition to the fact that they're going to share about your show, at a personal level, at least for me as a creator, that's the type of thing that will keep you going. Like we just got feedback from a customer of ours today who has a relatively small audience, but she writes about grief and managing grief. It's not like the happiest subject in the world, but that's what she writes about. And sometimes that can be a heavy issue for her to have to write about, obviously, and can feel like at times, why should I keep doing this? But she'll periodically get feedback from these superfans telling her about the impact that this has had on her life as they've been had on their life as they're going through difficult times, like the anniversary of loss or the first time experiencing loss. And just that response from people telling her that she has made an impact on their life is enough for her to keep pushing through some of these difficult times. So it's worth the work here and now to create opportunities for folks to respond to you. So I hope that was interesting. And I have a couple links here where you can find the deck. There are a bunch of links to Mark's project, Podcast Accelerator, to Josh's project for the interested, and also to a few things that I've created at chrisvasquez.design/fans to friends. And you can also snag a podcast email landing page that is an easy way for you to start building a newsletter if you haven't already created a newsletter at templates.aweber.com/podcast. Because, and I'm biased, obviously, I work at an email company, but having folks on a list gives you an opportunity to form intimate connections with them. Like the inbox, although people for decades now have been saying that email is dead or dying, continues to be one of the places where people carry on direct, intimate, one-to-one conversations. So if you don't have a list, start one. I would love if it was with AWeber, but if you don't want to start it with us, start it with someone, because that'll give you that direct channel to these folks who are going to end up being your super fans. And that's what I got.
All right. So we've got a couple of questions. That was excellent, Chris. Thank you. One of them is I'm going to put up here on the screen. It says, how do we start these welcome messages? I run a podcast. I give out the email address and I have social media accounts for them, but how is this welcome message delivered?
Gotcha. So to deliver an automated welcome email message, you're going to want to use an email service provider. So AWeber is one of those, but there are a bunch of other ones out there as well. And I really want to encourage people not to overthink this. Find an email provider and just create one welcome message. So in AWeber, they're called campaigns. In other platforms, they're called like automations. And all you have to do is go in, create a campaign or automation, add one message to it. I mean, I'd encourage you to basically copy Josh's and tweak it to your specific project, and then turn the automation on and let it do its work. Like that's the great thing about it, is once you have your campaigns set up at your email provider, you don't have to touch it. As people respond to that automated message, it'll just come into your normal inbox. If you have questions about this and need help getting this set up, I'd love to help you. You can just reach out to me on Twitter, or my email was in this earlier. It's christv@aweber.net or .com. I'm sorry, .net. Where's my head? .com. And no matter who your provider is, I would love to help. I really just care about you connecting with your audience.
All right, we got a question from Glenn. Glenn's got a couple questions, but here's the first one. I started putting together a mailing list for my podcast earlier this year, but I haven't done anything with it yet. What's a good first step? How do new podcasters start using their lists?
Very good question. The first thing I would encourage you to do, I'll give you another tip after this, is set up an automated welcome message if you didn't do that already, because that first message that goes out right after someone signs up, that is going to be your highest engagement rate that you ever have, unless you would really surprise me if you had a higher engagement rate. So that means more people are going to end up opening that message and clicking links in that message and responding to that message than any other message that you send. So do that first. Apart from that, I just want to encourage you to send your folks on your list a message regularly. And that's for a number of different reasons. It's because you want to build the expectation that you're going to be mailing them in their inbox so that they open up and they respond and they expect you to show up. And also because it'll make sure that your mail gets to the inbox. This is something that prior to coming to AWeber, I didn't think about a whole lot, but just because you send mail through your provider doesn't mean that it's going to get into your recipient's mailbox, to your subscriber's mailbox, because the mailbox providers like Gmail and Comcast and whatever, they're trying to make sure that their users don't get spammed. So if you get this list of people who, and then never mail them, and they've just been sitting on your list for a year or 2 years, and then you send them a mail or send them a message, the message isn't necessarily going to get into everyone's inboxes, and it's not going to be prioritized in their inboxes. And what that means is if people don't see the message, then they're not going to open it. And the next time you mail them again, it's even less likely to get to their mailboxes. Now, I don't want this to be all doom and gloom, because there's a really easy solution to this, which is send messages to your audience frequently. And the tactical way to get past the question of like, well, what do I send? Do I have to spend hours writing something to them? The answer to that is no. You can send them a 1 or 2 sentence message about something interesting that you learned recently, or a project that you're working on, or something like that. A newsletter does not have to be a highly designed, super long piece of content. Like Josh Spector, I'm a big fan of his, if you can't tell. He has a daily email that he sends that is like 1 or 2 sentences long, and that's it. But every time it's valuable and interesting and makes me think. So I really look forward to seeing emails from him. So if you've had your list and you only started it earlier this year, you're probably good to be mailing them. But I want to encourage you, get a message out to them and do it today.
Okay. We have another question from Glenn. This one is it a legal requirement to have your mailing address in your list emails?
Yes, it is. Although it doesn't have to be your home address. You can oftentimes we'll see people get a PO box for their mailing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then we have a question from Pam. What is the C-SPAM law?
The CAN-SPAM law, that is a series of regulations around email. And it actually kind of relates to the last question. It's without going too much into depth around it, this is another reason that you want to use an email service provider like AWeber or one of our competitors to send mail to your audience. Because there are certain expectations of you when you're sending bulk mail like this to groups of people. Things like you need to have the address in the email. Things like there needs to be an easy way for people to unsubscribe from your email. And the CAN-SPAM law has been like the law of the land for a very long time. But there are new laws and regulations that have both been passed in Europe, in California, and other legislation that is likely to become law nationally that that email service providers like us are thinking about, so you don't have to worry about it. So GDPR is the European law that is really about a number of things, but it focuses heavily on making sure that there was explicit consent when people signed up for your email list. And tools like email service providers like us give you the tools to make sure that you can get that consent and manage it. That was a lot, and it wasn't specific to CAN-SPAM, but it's a regulation. There's a lot of stuff in it. And if you're using an email service provider, you probably don't have to worry about it too much.
This question is from Stacy. You had a slide that had something called sentiment, the smiling faces. What's the name of that?
So this is we call it the sentiment widget in Aweber, but it's just a simple poll. And if your email tool has polls, you can use it to build this. But if it doesn't, don't stress about it. You just need 2 buttons, or even just 1 button where you ask, did you like today's email? Yes. And if people click that button, you can use that same interaction to try and gauge people's sentiment towards your email. I'm a super nerd about these quick, low friction feedback elements like this. They're in my opinion, my biased opinion, they're the best way for you to quickly identify the relationships that you should really focus on in your email.
Wonderful. I believe that's all the questions we have for now. So, Chris, we mentioned a few things. Can you go back to the slide where people can get so you got the Simple Podcast email landing page and templates.aweber.com/podcast. And then, of course, you have the slides. If anybody wants that, they can check that out at chrisvasquez.design/fan-to-friends.
Yeah, sorry. I shouldn't have those hyphens in there.
fans, 2 friends. We put those links in the comments for people. And then your email is christv@aweber.com, not
Yes.
.net. And so as we close out here, Chris, do you have any final thoughts for people that are getting started with email or wanting to kind of take it up to the next level?
Yeah, my getting started thought is seriously just set yourself a consistent schedule, and no matter what happens, stick to it. So if that means it's not going to be the graphical quality that you want it to be, or it's not quite as long as you want it to be, it's okay to sacrifice on that initially. What you really want to do to form relationships with people is continuously show up. I worked at an advertising startup prior to this that did video advertising, and we did research on YouTube videos where production values, your lighting, your sound, all that sort of stuff, they had an impact on engagement to a point where it was not unwatchable. But then incrementally increasing your production values past that point had very little impact on what people thought about your content. So I'm not saying put something that's garbage out there, but the things that are really going to bother you, the things that you're likely to get hung up and use as excuses not to ship, whether it's your podcast or email, those are likely things that your audience isn't going to notice. And it's better for you to get something out there than it is to never get anything out there because you're waiting for it to be perfect. So just get it out there. Like I have a stupid newsletter about would you rather things and people like it.
I think that's cool. Well, Chris, we are grateful. You are on Twitter at ClickPop, so we hope people will say thank you and tweet that to you. And yeah, we appreciate everything. I'm hoping maybe, crossing fingers, I'll get to shake hands with you and say hello in Nashville in August. That's the hope anyway. And if not, we appreciate you being available virtually. And yeah, so thank you again for everything. Great stuff.
Yeah. I'm grateful for the time, man. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. And thanks everyone for checking this out. And the replay will be available in Podcast Movement University, which is university.podcastmovement.com. It's free to join. So thank you again, everyone.